Jake Martinez stood in the middle of the biggest junkyard he'd ever seen. Outpost 7 wasn't like the salvage yards back on Earth. This place stretched for miles, filled with broken alien ships from 100 different species. Some were small fighters, others were massive cargo haulers. All of them were considered worthless now. He kicked a piece of twisted metal out of his path and kept walking. Jake had been fixing ships for 15 years, ever since he was 17, and rebuilt his first shuttle engine in his uncle's garage back in Nevada. Now he was out here on the edge of known space doing repair work for anyone who could pay. Smugglers, traders, even the occasional pirate who needed their engines running and didn't ask too many questions. The alien species in this sector thought humans were interesting but reckless. They followed the rules, stuck to manufacturer guidelines, and never modified anything without proper authorization. Jake thought that was the most boring way to live. Where was the creativity? Where was the fun in just following instructions? That's when he saw it. Hidden behind a mountain of scrap metal and broken hull plating was something massive. Jake climbed over a pile of debris to get a better look, and his jaw dropped. It was a Corvathi heavy cruiser. Not just any cruiser either. This was a warship, the kind that used to patrol the border systems back before the war ended. The ship was in terrible shape. Huge holes torn through the hull. Scorch marks from plasma weapons covering every surface. The engines were dark and cold. Someone had already stripped out most of the valuable components. What was left looked like a skeleton, a ghost of what it used to be. But Jake saw something different. He saw potential. He found the yard manager, a four-armed alien named Torvik who ran the salvage operation. Torvik was sorting through a pile of circuit boards when Jake approached. "That Corvathi cruiser back there," Jake said. "The big one. What's the story?" Torvik didn't even look up. "The Valiant Reach. Destroyed in battle 3 years ago. Towed here for parts. We stripped everything worth taking. Now it's just taking up space." "How much?" That got Torvik's attention. All four eyes swiveled to look at Jake. "You want to buy it?" "Maybe." "How much?" Torvik made a sound that might have been laughter. 500 credits. And that's me being generous. That ship is dead, human. The quantum core is fractured. Hull integrity is at 23%. Navigation systems are completely corrupted. No engineer in their right mind would touch it. Jake smiled. "Good thing I'm not in my right mind then." He transferred the credits right there. Torvik actually looked concerned for a moment, like he felt bad taking money from someone so obviously foolish. But business was business and the deal was done. Within an hour, Jake had moved all his tools and equipment into the sealed hangar where the cruiser sat. The place was huge, big enough to fit 3 ships this size. The Valiant Reach sat in the center like a beached whale, dark and silent. Jake walked around it slowly, running his hands over the damaged hull. He'd never worked on a Corvathi ship before, but metal was metal. Engineering was engineering. The principles were the same even if the technology was different. He was studying a damaged power coupling when he heard footsteps behind him. A young Vexian engineer named Riley walked in, carrying a datapad and looking curious. "I heard a human bought the death trap," Riley said. "Didn't believe it until I saw it myself." "It's not a death trap," Jake said, not looking up. "It's a challenge. It's impossible. I've seen the damage reports. Every system is compromised. You'd need a fortune in parts and a team of expert engineers working for years." Jake finally looked at Riley. "Or you need one mechanic who doesn't care about doing things the proper way." Riley tilted their head, a gesture of confusion among Vexians. "What do you mean?" "You aliens, you all think the same way. Something breaks, you replace it with the exact same part. System fails, you follow the manual to fix it. But what if the manual is wrong? What if the original design wasn't as good as it could be? That's not how engineering works." "Maybe not alien engineering," Jake said with a grin. "But human engineering? We make things work whether they're supposed to or not." He pulled out his tools and got to work. Riley watched for a few minutes, then a few hours. Other aliens started gathering outside the hangar, curious about what the crazy human was doing. They placed bets on how long it would take before Jake gave up. Nobody bet on him succeeding. That just made Jake more determined. He looked at the dark, broken ship and made a promise. He was going to bring this beauty back to life, and he was going to make it better than it ever was before. The real work was about to begin. The first month was the hardest. Jake spent 16 hours a day inside the cruiser, crawling through damaged corridors and mapping out every system. The ship was worse than he thought. Entire sections had no power. Life support was completely offline. The weapon systems were fused together from overheating. But Jake had learned something important during his years as a mechanic. Every problem had a solution. Sometimes that solution wasn't pretty, and sometimes it definitely wasn't approved by any safety board, but it worked. The quantum core was the biggest issue. It was the heart of the ship, the thing that powered everything. The Korvathi had designed it as a single massive unit, and it was cracked right down the middle. Replacement cores cost more than Jake would earn in 10 lifetimes. So he did what humans do best. He improvised. He pulled the entire quantum core out and sold it for scrap. Then he bought 6 human-made fusion reactors, the kind they used in mining colonies. Each one was a fraction of the power of the original core, but Jake had an idea. He networked them together, connecting them in a pattern that no Korvathi engineer would ever consider. The reactors fed into each other, creating redundancies and backup systems. Riley showed up every day now, fascinated by what Jake was doing. "This shouldn't work," Riley said, studying the reactor configuration. "The power distribution is all wrong. The energy flow doesn't follow any standard pattern." Jake was elbow-deep in wiring, connecting the reactors to the ship's main power grid. "That's because I'm not following any standard. I'm making my own pattern. But the calculations don't add up." "Then maybe the calculations are wrong." Jake pulled himself out from under the console and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Look, Korvathi engineers designed this ship thinking one way. They wanted one big core because that's efficient and clean. But you know what's better than efficient? Reliable. One of my reactors fails, I've got 5 more keeping things running. Their core fails, the whole ship goes dark." Riley thought about that for a moment. "That's actually clever. Humans have been making things work with less for centuries. It's kind of our specialty." The navigation system was another nightmare. The original computer core was corrupted beyond recovery. Jake spent 2 weeks trying to salvage it before finally giving up. Then he remembered something. He'd seen mining drones using adaptive navigation systems, computers that could learn and adjust on the fly instead of following preset patterns. He bought 3 of those systems for cheap and installed them in place of the original navigation computer. Then he wrote his own code, combining human programming logic with what he could salvage from the Korvathi software. The result was messy and definitely not regulation, but when he powered it up, the system actually responded faster than the original design. Word spread through Outpost 7 about the human and his impossible project. Engineers from different species started showing up at the hangar, watching Jake work. Most of them came to see him fail. Some came to offer advice that Jake usually ignored. A few came because they were genuinely curious. A Korvathi engineer named Tavek watched for 3 days straight before finally speaking. "You're butchering that ship." Jake was installing new hull plating, using a welding technique he'd invented himself. "I'm saving it." "You're making modifications that violate a dozen safety regulations. The power flow is irregular. The structural reinforcements are in the wrong places. None of this follows proper procedure." "Proper procedure said this ship was garbage," Jake shot back. "I'm proving procedure wrong." Tavek was quiet for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he picked up a tool. "Show me how you're reinforcing that section. I want to understand your thinking." That's how Jake gained his first real helper. Tavek didn't agree with the methods, but he couldn't argue with the results. Together they worked on the hull integrity, combining Korvathi knowledge of their own ships with human creativity. The weapon systems took another 3 months. Jake couldn't afford new plasma cannons, so he modified what was left. He stripped down the targeting computers and rebuilt them using human tracking algorithms, the kind used in automated defense systems back on Earth. He recalibrated the power feeds to the weapons, making them more efficient even if they were less powerful than the originals. Riley helped with the shield generators, finding creative ways to patch the damaged emitters. They used parts from 4 different ship classes, creating a hybrid system that technically shouldn't be compatible but somehow worked when Jake finished wiring it all together. 6 months into the project, other mechanics started taking Jake seriously. They stopped laughing and started asking questions. How did he connect those systems? What made him think that modification would work? Jake answered honestly every time. He didn't know if it would work until he tried it. That was the human way. Try, fail, learn, try again. The life support came online first. Then the lights flickered to life throughout the ship. The reactor network hummed with steady power. Systems that had been dark for 3 years suddenly had energy flowing through them again. 8 months after buying the wreck, Jake stood in the pilot's chair and looked at the main console. Every system showed green. Well, mostly green. There were a few yellows and 1 blinking red, but that was fine. He'd fix those later. Riley stood beside him, holding a data pad that showed impossible readings. The power efficiency is actually higher than the original specifications. The response time on the navigation system is 0.3 seconds faster. Jake, this is incredible. Let's see if she flies, Jake said, his hand hovering over the ignition sequence. Outside the hangar, a crowd had gathered. Dozens of aliens watching through the windows. Most still expected failure. A few hoped for success. Jake pressed the button. The Valiant Reach shuddered. A deep rumble echoed through the frame as the engines came online. The sound built and built, growing louder until the entire hangar shook. Lights blazed across the hall. And then, slowly, the massive cruiser lifted off the ground. The crowd outside went silent. Station sensors started screaming alerts. A ship that had been declared dead was flying. Jake laughed, pure joy flooding through him. I told you it would work. The impossible had just become possible. And this was only the beginning. The council inspectors arrived 2 days after the test flight. 3 officials in pressed uniforms carrying data pads and wearing expressions that said they'd already made up their minds. Jake met them in the hangar, still wearing his grease-stained work clothes. This vessel cannot be space-worthy, the lead inspector said, a tall Valerian named Kess. Our records show it was declared a total loss 3 years ago. We're here to ground it permanently. Jake crossed his arms. Go ahead and run your diagnostics. I've got nothing to hide. They spent 4 hours examining every system. Jake watched as their confident expressions slowly changed to confusion, then disbelief. The numbers didn't lie. The ship wasn't just functional. By every metric they could measure, it was performing better than factory specifications. This is irregular, Kess said finally. These modifications aren't approved. The power systems don't match any standard configuration. The weapons targeting is completely non-standard. But does it work? Jake asked. Kess looked at his data pad, then at Jake. It works better than it should. That's precisely the problem. Before anyone could respond, alarms shrieked through the station's communication system. Every speaker crackled to life with the same emergency broadcast. A passenger liner called the Star of Providence was under attack in the Theta system, 3 light-years away. 4 Ravager pirate ships were overwhelming its defenses. 3,000 passengers and crew were on board, and the liner's shields were failing fast. The station's defense fleet was deployed on the other side of the sector. Response time would be 90 minutes at best. The liner didn't have 90 minutes. Jake didn't think. He just moved. He sprinted toward the Valiant Reach, shouting over his shoulder. Riley Tavek, get on board now. You can't launch this vessel, Kess called after him. We haven't approved it for combat operations. Jake stopped at the boarding ramp and turned around. You want to tell 3,000 people they died because of paperwork? Then you take responsibility for that. He ran inside. Riley was already at the sensor station, fingers flying over controls. Tavek appeared moments later, heading straight for the weapons console. 2 human dockworkers Jake recognized from the station, brothers named Cole and Derek Hayes, rushed aboard without being asked. We know ships, Cole said simply. Where do you need us? Engineering, Jake said, strapping into the pilot's chair. Keep those reactors balanced. This is going to get rough. The Valiant Reach launched before the docking clamps were fully released, tearing free with a screech of metal. Jake pushed the engines hard, feeling the ship respond instantly to his commands. The modifications he'd made to the control systems worked perfectly. The ship didn't just follow orders. It felt like it anticipated them. They hit hyperspace in under 30 seconds, a jump that should have taken twice that long. The navigation computer Jake had pieced together calculated routes faster than the original system ever could. 3 minutes later they dropped back into normal space right in the middle of a battle. The Star of Providence was a massive civilian vessel, beautiful under normal circumstances. Now it was surrounded by smoke and debris. 4 Ravager frigates circled it like sharks, their weapons tearing chunks out of the liner's failing shields. Escape pods were already launching, people abandoning ship in desperation. 4 against 1, Riley said, voice tight with fear. Jake, these are military vessels. We're outnumbered and outgunned. Maybe, Jake said, his hands moving across the controls. But they're not ready for what we can do. He opened a comm channel. Ravager vessels, this is the Valiant Reach. Break off your attack immediately. The response was laughter. One of the pirate captains came on screen, a scarred warrior who'd probably been terrorizing this sector for years. A Corvathi cruiser? That design is 20 years old. Stand down or be destroyed, fool. Jake smiled. Your funeral. He cut the comm and pushed the throttle forward. The Valiant Reach accelerated faster than any Corvathi ship had a right to move. The Ravagers were expecting the slow, steady approach of a standard cruiser. Instead, Jake dove straight at them, spinning the ship and firing as he passed. The targeting system he'd rebuilt locked onto the lead Ravager instantly. Plasma bolts struck with precision that shocked even Jake. The pirate ship's shields flared and failed on the first volley. The second volley punched through their hull. "One down," Tavek shouted from weapons. The other 3 Ravagers scattered, trying to surround the cruiser. That was smart tactics against a normal ship. But Jake wasn't flying normal. He spun the Valiant Reach in a corkscrew pattern, using the enhanced maneuvering thrusters he'd installed. The ship moved like a fighter, not a heavy cruiser. "Jake, you're pulling 4 Gs, Derek called from engineering. "The structural integrity is holding, but the original design never accounted for this kind of stress." "Then it's a good thing I reinforced the frame," Jake shot back, throwing the ship into another impossible turn. He flew on instinct, trusting the modifications he'd made. The ship responded instantly to every command. When he needed more power to the engines, the reactor network adjusted automatically. When he banked hard left, the inertial dampeners compensated perfectly. 2 Ravager ships tried to catch him in a crossfire. Jake saw it coming and dove below their firing line, coming up behind one of them. Tavek fired without being told, his shot striking the pirate's engine core. The ship spun out of control, venting atmosphere. "2 down," Tavek said, amazement in his voice. "This ship handles like nothing I've ever seen." The remaining 2 Ravagers realized they were in serious trouble. They concentrated their fire on the Valiant Reach, dozens of plasma bolts hammering the shields. Warning lights flashed across Jake's console. "Shields at 40%, Riley called out. "Cole, reroute power from non-essential systems," Jake ordered. "Already on it." The human brothers worked in perfect sync, managing the power flow across 6 reactors in ways the Korvathi designers never imagined possible. Shield strength stabilized at 35%. Jake targeted the 3rd Ravager, but this captain was smarter. They kept moving, using evasive patterns that made targeting difficult. So Jake did something crazy. He shut down the forward thrusters completely and let momentum carry the Valiant Reach forward while rotating the ship backward. Now he was flying backward while shooting forward. The Ravager captain had never seen anything like it. For 3 seconds they were completely exposed. Tavek didn't waste the opportunity. Direct hit to their command deck. 3 down. The last Ravager captain decided survival was more important than pride. Their ship turned and jumped to hyperspace, abandoning the fight entirely. The battle was over. 4 pirate ships against 1 restored cruiser, and the pirates had lost. Jake slumped in his chair, adrenaline still pumping through his veins. "Everyone okay?" Responses came back from all stations. "Shaken but fine." The Star of Providence was hailing them, 3,000 voices trying to say thank you all at once. Riley was staring at the sensor readouts like they contained secrets of the universe. "Jake, we just did the impossible. Those were military-grade frigates. We shouldn't have won that fight." Jake looked at the stars outside the viewport and smiled. "Humans don't believe in shouldn't. We only believe in finding a way." The legend had begun. The news spread faster than Jake expected. By the time the Valiant Reach returned to Outpost 7, the story had already traveled across half the sector. A human mechanic had taken a ship declared worthless and used it to defeat 4 Ravager warships. The details got more dramatic with each retelling, but the core truth remained the same. Jake had done the impossible. The docking bay was packed when they landed. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species waited to see the ship that had become the talk of the station. Camera drones hovered everywhere, broadcasting live feeds to news networks across known space. Jake just wanted to get some sleep and check the ship for damage. Inspector Kess was waiting at the boarding ramp, but his attitude had changed completely. "The Council has reviewed the combat footage," he said quietly. "Your vessel is approved for full operation. No restrictions." Jake nodded, too tired to feel triumphant. "Thanks. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to run diagnostics." But the attention didn't stop. Over the next 3 days, Jake received 47 job offers, requests for interviews from every major news outlet, and even a marriage proposal from someone on a planet he'd never heard of. He ignored most of it and focused on repairing the minor damage from the battle. On the 4th day, a military transport docked at the station. Out stepped Admiral Corvin of the Korvathi Navy, along with an armed escort and 3 engineers carrying equipment cases. The crowd parted as the Admiral made his way to Jake's hangar. Jake was under the ship, replacing a damaged shield emitter when Tavek rushed over. "Jake, you need to see this. Admiral Corvin is here." "Who?" Jake slid out from under the cruiser, tool in hand. Only the most decorated flag officer in the Corvathi fleet. He commanded the border defense during the war. Jake, this is serious. The admiral entered the hangar, his posture military perfect, his uniform covered in medals and honors. He looked at the Valiant Reach for a long moment, then at Jake, who was still holding a plasma wrench and wearing clothes that hadn't been washed in 3 days. You are Jake Martinez? Corvin's voice was deep and formal. That's me. Jake set down the tool. Something I can help you with, Admiral? You desecrated a Corvathi warship, Corvin said flatly. You modified systems without authorization, violated design principles that have stood for centuries, and completely ignored military protocol. Jake tensed, ready for whatever was coming. Yeah, I did. Got a problem with that. Corvin's expression didn't change. My engineers have spent the last 4 days analyzing every second of your battle with the Ravagers. They've studied your modifications, reviewed your flight patterns, and examined your tactical decisions. He paused. I need to understand how you achieved this. That wasn't what Jake expected. I'm sorry, what? The Admiral gestured to his engineers, who immediately began setting up equipment. The Corvathi Navy has been fighting the Ravagers for 5 years. We win more battles than we lose, but our tactics are predictable. Our ships are powerful but inflexible. You flew that cruiser in ways we never imagined possible. One of the engineers pulled up a holographic display showing the battle. This maneuver here, she said, pointing to the moment Jake flew backward while shooting forward. This violates every principle of naval combat doctrine. But it worked perfectly. Jake scratched his head. I just did what made sense in the moment. They expected me to fly like you guys fly. So I flew different. Exactly, Corvin said. That's what we need to learn. The Corvathi design philosophy emphasizes perfection in original construction. Once a ship is built, it is complete. But you see ships as starting points, not finished products. Well, yeah, Jake said. Everything can be improved. Why would you just accept something as perfect when you could make it better? Corvin's mandibles clicked, and what Jake had learned was a sign of approval. I'm authorized to make you an offer. Join the Corvathi Navy as a civilian contractor. Help us modernize our fleet. Teach our engineers your methods. You'll have unlimited resources, a staff of hundreds, and a salary that would make you wealthy for life. Jake didn't even have to think about it. No thanks. The hangar went silent. Tavik looked shocked. Riley's eyes went wide. Even the Admiral seemed caught off guard. You're refusing? Corvin asked. I appreciate the offer, Admiral, I really do. But I'm a mechanic, not a bureaucrat. You put me in an office, make me fill out forms and attend meetings, I'll go crazy within a week. Jake picked up his wrench again. Besides, this ship still needs work. Corvin studied Jake for a long moment. Then what do you suggest? I'll keep doing what I'm doing. Flying around, helping people who need it, proving what human-modified ships can do. You want to learn? Watch and study. Send your engineers to examine the Valiant Reach. I'll answer their questions. But I'm not joining a military structure. That's highly irregular. Yeah, well, irregular seems to be my specialty. To Jake's surprise, Corvin actually smiled. It was a small expression, barely noticeable, but it was there. Very well. The Valiant Reach is officially recognized as an independent vessel operating with full military honors. You may go where you wish and act as you see fit. In return, you will allow our engineers to study your work. Deal, Jake said, shaking the Admiral's hand. Corvin turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. The Ravagers have posted a bounty on your head. 1 million credits for your capture or death. They're quite upset about what happened. Jake shrugged. Let them be upset. Maybe they'll think twice before attacking civilians again. After the Admiral left, Riley approached Jake, looking concerned. 1 million credits is a lot of money. Every pirate and bounty hunter in the sector will be looking for you. Then I guess I better make sure this ship stays in top condition, Jake said, crawling back under the cruiser. Hand me that power coupling, would you? Over the following weeks, the Valiant Reach became more than just a ship. It became a symbol. Other humans started showing up at Outpost 7, mechanics and engineers who'd heard the story and wanted to learn Jake's methods. Alien species that had previously dismissed human engineering as crude and unsophisticated began asking questions. Jake's crew grew slowly. Cole and Derek Hayes officially signed on as engineering specialists. A human pilot named Beth Cooper joined after her cargo hauler was destroyed by pirates. A Corvathi weapons officer who'd been discharged for questioning orders found a new home aboard the Valiant Reach. The ship itself continued to evolve. Jake never stopped modifying, improving, and experimenting. Each change made the vessel more capable, more unique. It wasn't just a restored cruiser anymore. It was something entirely new, a perfect blend of Corvathi design and human innovation. And somewhere in the dark spaces between stars, the Ravagers were planning their revenge. The warlord who commanded their fleet had been humiliated by a single human in a rebuilt ship. That kind of insult couldn't stand unanswered. Jake knew they'd come eventually. He was counting on it. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was being ready for a fight. The legend continued to grow. 6 months passed like a blur. The Valiant Reach and its crew became known across the sector, not because they sought fame, but because they kept showing up wherever trouble happened. A mining colony under attack, a medical transport stranded with failing engines, a research station surrounded by debris from a collapsing moon. Every time Jake and his crew arrived and found a way to help. The ship itself had changed dramatically. Jake never stopped tinkering. He'd added external armor plating in unusual patterns that distributed impact force better than standard designs. The weapon systems had been upgraded 3 times, each iteration more effective than the last. The engines could now push the cruiser to speeds that made Corvathi engineers shake their heads in disbelief. Riley had become the best sensor operator Jake had ever seen, able to track multiple targets through interference that would blind most systems. Tavek flew like he'd been born in the pilot's chair, his Corvathi training combined with human unpredictability creating something special. Cole and Derek kept the reactors running so smoothly that the power output had increased by 30%. Beth handled communications and navigation, her calm voice a steady presence during every crisis. Then came the message that changed everything. Jake was in the engine room recalibrating the reactor network, when Beth's voice crackled over the intercom. "Jake, we've got an emergency broadcast. It's bad." He climbed up to the bridge, wiping oil from his hands. The main screen showed a planetary system, peaceful farmland visible from orbit. Colony world Verdant 9, home to 40,000 settlers. Mostly families, people who'd left the crowded core worlds to build something new. 20 Ravager ships just jumped into the system, Beth said, her voice tight. "They're demanding the colony surrender everything. Food, supplies, ships, everything. If they refuse, the Ravagers will orbital bombard the settlements." Jake felt his stomach drop. Where's the nearest military response? 2 hours away at best. The Colony Defense Force has 3 patrol boats. They're completely outmatched. Riley looked up from the sensor station. "Jake, we're 30 minutes out. We're the only ship in range." The bridge went silent. Everyone understood what this meant. 20 warships against 1 cruiser. It didn't matter how good the Valiant Reach was or how skilled the crew had become. The numbers were impossible. Tavek spoke first. "We have to try." Cole nodded from the engineering station. "Those are families down there. Kids." Derek added, "We didn't come this far to run from a fight." Beth looked at Jake, waiting for the decision. They all knew it was suicide. They also all knew they couldn't live with themselves if they ran. Jake took a deep breath. "Set course for Verdant 9. Maximum speed. Beth, send a message to those settlers. Tell them help is coming." "What do we tell the Ravagers?" she asked. "Tell them if they want a fight, we're happy to give them one." The Valiant Reach dropped out of hyperspace above Verdant 9 28 minutes later. The tactical display lit up with red markers. 20 Ravager vessels in a loose formation surrounding the planet. Frigates, destroyers, and 1 heavy cruiser that served as the flagship. The colony's 3 patrol boats floated nearby, their weapons armed but clearly outgunned. A comm channel opened. The Ravager warlord appeared on screen, a battle-scarred warrior named Kretch who'd been terrorizing the sector for a decade. "The fool who embarrassed my captains has finally arrived. I was hoping you'd be stupid enough to come." Jake leaned back in his chair, forcing himself to look relaxed. "Kretch, I've heard about you. Mostly that you like picking on people who can't fight back. And I've heard about you, human. The mechanic who thinks he's a warrior. Your bounty will make me rich, and destroying your ship will restore my reputation." Kretch smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Surrender now and I'll make your death quick." "Counteroffer," Jake said. "You leave this system right now, and I won't send you running home like your other captains." Kretch's smile vanished. "Kill him." The 20 Ravager ships opened fire simultaneously. Space lit up with plasma bolts and missiles, all converging on the Valiant Reach. Jake threw the ship into evasive maneuvers, spinning and diving through the incoming fire. The shields flared as impact struck home but held. "Shields at 70%, Riley called out. "Jake, we can't tank this kind of firepower." Then we don't tank it. We move. Jake pushed the engines to maximum, flying the cruiser through gaps in the enemy formation that seemed too small to fit through. Tavek, target their weapons systems, not their hulls. I want them disabled, not destroyed. That's going to take longer, Tavek protested. Then we better move faster. The Valiant Reach became a blur of motion. Jake flew like he'd never flown before, using every trick he'd learned and inventing new ones on the spot. He'd drop below a destroyer's firing arc, pop up behind a frigate, and dance away before they could adjust their aim. The ship responded to his commands like it was reading his mind, the modifications he'd made creating a vessel that moved more like a fighter than a heavy cruiser. Tavek's shots were surgical, hitting weapon emplacements and engine clusters with precision. One Ravager ship lost its main guns. Another spun out of control with damaged thrusters. A third went dark as its power systems failed. But there were still 17 more, and the Valiant Reach couldn't dodge everything. More hits struck the shields. Warning lights flashed across every console. Shields at 40%, Riley announced. Cole, Derek, I need more power, Jake called to engineering. We're already at 110%, Cole shouted back. Any more and we risk reactor failure. Then give me 120. I'll deal with the risk. The brothers worked frantically, balancing power flow across 6 reactors in ways that would terrify any safety inspector. The shield strengthened slightly, buying precious seconds. Jake spotted an opening. 3 Ravager ships had clustered together, trying to coordinate their fire. He dove straight at them, accelerating to ramming speed. The enemy captains assumed he'd pull away at the last second. He didn't. The Valiant Reach shot through the gap between 2 frigates with meters to spare. The wake from the cruiser's engines disrupted their sensor systems. Tavek fired backward, hitting both ships before they could recover. 5 down, 15 to go, Tavek said, though his voice carried doubt. The battle continued for 30 minutes that felt like hours. Jake pushed himself and his crew beyond their limits. Beth rerouted every spare bit of power to critical systems. Riley predicted enemy movements before they happened, calling out warnings that saved them a dozen times. The Hayes brothers performed miracles in engineering, keeping the overworked reactors from exploding. They disabled 8 Ravager ships. 9, 10. But the cost was mounting. The Valiant Reach was taking serious damage. Hull breaches in 3 sections. 1 reactor offline. Shields down to 15%. Jake, we can't keep this up, Beth said quietly. The ship won't hold together much longer. Jake knew she was right. They'd done better than anyone could have expected, but the numbers were still against them. 10 Ravager ships remained, including the flagship. The colony was still in danger. Then Riley's console started beeping frantically. New contacts. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace. Jake's heart sank. More Ravagers? They were finished. But the tactical display showed something different. 12 ships bearing Corvathi military markings, led by a heavy battlecruiser. Admiral Corvin's voice came over the comm. Apologies for the delay, Jake Martinez. We came as fast as we could. The Corvathi fleet opened fire, and the tide of battle shifted instantly. The remaining Ravager ships found themselves caught between the Valiant Reach and a full military battle group. Kretsch's flagship tried to escape, but Tavek put a perfectly aimed shot through their hyperspace drive. Within minutes it was over. The Ravagers either surrendered or fled in whatever ships could still move. The colony was safe. Jake slumped in his chair, every muscle aching. The bridge crew sat in stunned silence, processing what they'd just survived. Admiral Corvin's face appeared on the view screen. That was the most reckless, foolish, and inspiring piece of flying I've ever witnessed. 20 ships, Jake. You held off 20 ships. We did what needed doing, Jake said simply. Yes, you did. Corvin paused. The Council wants to discuss mass-producing your modifications. They're calling it the Martinez Protocol. Jake shook his head, smiling despite his exhaustion. Tell the Council thanks, but no. The Valiant Reach stays unique. One of a kind. They anticipated that answer. So here's the alternative. They're establishing a new program, recruiting human engineers to work with our fleets. Not to follow our rules, but to teach us to think differently. Now that, Jake said, sounds like a good idea. The Valiant Reach limped back to Outpost 7 for repairs, escorted by the Corvathi fleet. The battle was already spreading across the networks, the story growing with each telling. A human and his impossible ship, holding the line against overwhelming odds. Jake spent the next month rebuilding the damage, making the ship even better than before. Engineers from a dozen species came to study his work. The age of human innovation in space had truly begun, not through conquest or force, but through one mechanic who refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. The legend was complete.